here with Dr. Joe Rigney, Fellow of Theology at New St. Andrews College, here doing a couple workshops at the ACCS conference. One of them was on Paideia.
Yeah.
So can you give us your explanation of what Paideia is?
Yeah, real briefly, Paideia it shows up in the Bible in a number of different places. The most prominent one, the reason it matters for classical education, is fathers bring your children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And the word for discipline there is Paideia.
Okay.
So, and in the ancient Greek world, it was a really all-encompassing kind of concept. It was a central concept that had to do with sort of the enculturation and formation of future citizens. So the Paideia of the Greeks was, how do you become a Greek citizen? How do you take a child so they grow up to be a fruitful citizen in the Greek context? So the Paideia of the Lord, right? So raise your children in the Paideia of the Lord. Well, that's enculturating children, forming children into citizens of God's kingdom.
Okay.
And so it's that all-encompassing, it includes both sort of the formal instruction piece, classrooms, while you have schools, but also the more intangible, informal, as you walk by the way, when you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed at night, enculturation, that kind of instruction too.
Okay. So obviously Ephesians there is speaking directly to fathers, but we are a school.
Right.
So we talk a lot about partnering with parents.
Absolutely.
So, to maybe just speak to the importance of that.
So the duty of Paideia belongs to fathers. So if anything goes wrong, and when all is said and done, who's going to answer for it? Dad is.
Yeah.
But Dad's responsible to seeing to it that it gets done. Mm-hmm. But how it gets done is a matter of wisdom and prudence and context and availability and so forth. So for families to say, all right, this is our responsibility, and we want to partner together with other families to say form a school, and then delegate certain aspects of it. It's still, if anything goes wrong there, Dad's got to answer for that kid.
Yeah.
But the idea of partnering together in order to fulfill it, it is a sort of community project in many ways. And that's true whether someone decides the best way for me to fulfill this is through homeschool, or the best way for me to fulfill this is through a Christian school. In either case, you need a wider community in order to successfully do it.
So how about purpose of that? So you think Paideia of the Greeks and then Paideia of the Lord, why did the Greeks want to do that? And then why should Christian fathers do that?
Yeah, so because, a nation or a people like the Greeks want to ensure their generational fruitfulness. We want to continue to be a people for generation after generation. Well, the Bible makes promises to God's people, generation to generation. I will be your God. I will be to you and your children after you. Yeah. So the promises of God are not just for a single generation and then we sort of reboot and start over. They're generational promises. And so Paideia, so if God's made promises that I will be God to you from generation to generation, he's also established a means or a mechanism to ensure that faithfulness. Yeah. And that's the Paideia. So when in Deuteronomy, when it says, this is the commandment of the Lord, and you should do it, you and your son and your son's sons. The idea is this is generational fidelity, generational faithfulness, passing down the customs, the history, the stories, the worldviews, the religion, the customs of your people from one generation to another. And God's made promises, and this is the means that he has given us in order to keep them.
Yeah, that's good. So I've heard Pastor Doug Wilson this week talk about the culture war that we're in a few different times. How do you see classical Christian education movement, specifically ACCS, being part of that? Right? How are they? What's the impact that can have in terms of pushing back the darkness of the culture right now?
Yeah. So the frame that I have for thinking about how education sits within a Christian community. So if you think of the Christian community as a body. Worship, corporate worship on the Lord's Day with God's people is sort of the heartbeat of that body. It's like it's pumping blood. It's like every week we go and we pump the blood, but then the blood's got to go somewhere. It's got to go to the rest of the body. The rest of the body in terms of the flesh would be like the community life, the fellowship and the feasting and the evangelism and all of that sort of stuff. I think the backbone of that body is Christian education. So, and that includes both like the stuff that the church might do, say in Sunday schools or weekly Bible studies. So that's part of that fulfilling of that structural task. But it's also where, especially in the modern context, why Christian schools are so integral, because you can't, if you're pumping blood, but then week by week, your kids are being shaped, formed, educated, and trained by the Paideia of the world, then you'll end up, you've got blood pumping, but it's going into just a bag there's no structure,
Sure.
or the structure is distorted and twisted and corrupt.
Yep.
And so you're not going to have a healthy body. So Christian education is essential, I think, for the formation of thriving bodies, thriving communities of Christians, as sort of the structural integrity. That's why the word Paideia, when it shows up in the New Testament, it's always a kind of hard thing. It's in that passage in Hebrews where it says, our fathers disciplined us and it was painful.
Yeah.
But it was good for us, but it was painful.
Right.
The word there, that when they disciplined us, is Paideia. It's like, this is a painful thing. It's hard. It's not easy. The other place it shows up is the grace of God has appeared, Paideia-ing us to deny ungodliness. So it's like, and that's not easy either. Like resisting the temptations of the world. It's hard, but it's grace. It's drill sergeant. It's formative. So it's painful, but it's good. And so that's that kind of structural integrity of a community.
Yeah, that's good. So we pay attention to what's happening out in Moscow,
Sure.
Idaho,
Yeah.
For a while now, and just kind of see, Doug again talks about Christianizing things. Of course,
Yeah.
there's this whole thing of Christian nationalism, all that type of stuff.
Sure.
So what we're trying to do, our church that we're part of, the founders of the school, part of that mission that we have is renewing our city, right? We want to see our cities become more Christian.
Yeah.
Right. So you moved from Minneapolis out to Moscow to kind of join maybe a movement, you could say.
Yeah.
If you could kind of just speak to that, because we're always, we want to be partnering with parents, but we also want them to be in alignment with the mission that we have and be part of what we're doing.
Yeah,
Because we're going to
excellent.
need help if it's
That's
going
right.
to happen.
So again, thinking of that, so you think of the body imagery and then maybe combine it with a different image. This is one central to our Moscow project, which is the build and fight. From Ezra Nehemiah, where you're living in the ruins of Jerusalem, and what should you do? Well, rebuild the walls.
Yeah.
Refound the temple, so establish worship there, rebuild God's house. So there's that heartbeat again. That's the core. That's the first thing that they do on the return is they establish worship, right worship. But then the next thing they do is they start rebuilding the walls, and they have to do it with a sword in one hand and a shovel in the other. So they're building, but they're also fighting. And so a Christian community in this context, living in the ruins of Christendom, that wants to rebuild those walls, you've got to say, okay, this is our portion of the wall. There's a big city, right? There's Moscow and there's other places. There are all kinds of places. This is our little portion of the wall, and we want to both build and fight.
Yeah.
And part of the building is you got the worship, you got the education, but then you also do have the community life. We live, in proximity to each other. We are in each other's homes. We're in each other's lives. And I would say an important thing for that task in a community is we have businesses. Our households are productive, and they get together and they start businesses that give us a place to. That's the building. We're being fruitful. We're taking dominion. And the reason that's important for the longevity of a community is your kids are going to grow up. If it's a healthy church, if it's a great school, then they're going to want to go to college and they might go off somewhere. What's going to pull them back is both if it's church and school only, and there's no jobs,
Right.
there's nowhere for them to labor fruitfully, then they're going to find the job's going to matter in order for them to provide for their family. So you need to have the kind of community that has all of that whole package. Both the dominion taking through households and businesses, as well as holy reverent worship and faithful Christian education. It's that whole package of community life that you think of it as it's gravity.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're not trying to force the kids to come back. You're not pushing them, sword point, come home.
Right.
Instead, what you're saying is, this is so good.
Yeah.
It just pulls them back in. And then you're to the generational faithfulness. Now, of course, God always sometimes launches, right? So calls someone to go someplace else, whether it's to the nations or to some other part of the country. We budget for that. But the thing you're trying to build should be the sort of thing that a 25-year-old graduate who's newly married and grew up in your community should go, well, where else would I rather be?
Right.
I want to come back and build on that part of the wall because these are my people.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much
thank
for your
you.
time.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for all you do. Awesome.